Hey, Nick here. Just a quick preface before this episode starts. This was originally going to be Andy Milburn on episode 23, but Russia invaded Ukraine, and so we pushed this episode back. We had a plan of maybe splitting this episode up into two parts because Andy talks about his journey, and it's fantastic. I'll let you hear that later. And maybe combining that with some other journeys that we know of and just kind of launching a new series, but we're leaving it intact. This was going to be episode 23, but instead, it's now going to be this episode, and the irony is that we bumped this episode for Ukraine, and now Andy is in Ukraine. So, kind of feel like we should have had it out earlier, but he's there now, so wishing him support, and I'm going to throw it on back to past Nick. Thank you. Hello, welcome to episode 23 of Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. I'm Nick. I'm here with Vic.
Hello.
Will.
Howdy.
And we have special guest Andy Milburn in the house.
Our
hey, fellas.
second
Hello.
returning guest.
Great to be back.
It is awesome to have you back. Thank you.
So it is just, we have so much more to talk to Andy about today, so we're just going to cut the chatter and get right to it.
We did, if you could, just take a few minutes just to tell us who you are, some of your wickets, like why you're here sort of thing.
Why I'm here particularly today, I'm still trying to figure that out. How I got here.
Well, I mean, we saw you on the street and it's cold outside.
By all means, my name is Andy Milburn. I am a retired Marine colonel for my sins. I was in the Marine Corps for about 31 years, background as an infantry and special operations officer, and ended up at Special Operations Command Central as the deputy commander right before retiring. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I am what they might call a first-generation immigrant. My first taste of the United States, my first introduction to the U.S. was Paris Island, which gives you kind of a clue to perhaps my origins. Definitely not why I chose to stay here, but over the course of certainly the last 2 decades, I've been very fortunate to find myself in positions that proved to be both challenging and rewarding, and learned some extremely hard lessons, which I think are not always the easy way, which I think is the reason why I'm here today.
Absolutely,
is that enough of background?
Yeah, and
that's the recap from last.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely get into all those things because there's just a lot of really juicy nuggets there. But other things that you've mentioned that I'll definitely lift you up. I know you're extremely humble, and we appreciate that. But also author of When the Tempest Gathers, which is being considered for the Commandant's reading list. So congratulations on that.
Well,
Huge.
Yeah, thank you. Let's hope it is ultimately a congratulations. So for your listeners, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you canvass the board for the Commandant's reading list or the Commandant himself.
But if you were to do that,
but if you were, that would be quite okay with me.
Yeah, and that chronicles your time as the commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force in the fight against ISIS.
It does, yeah. That's the last quarter to a third of the book. But the book itself is about my career, and I say that though it's couched, I hope, in not a boring manner, and nor is it a SEAL autobiography with a lot of chest thumping. And there I was. Yeah, there it was. Yeah. It's I try to make it as entertaining as I could, and as honest as I could. So I think those of you who've read it will say that it's kind of a warts and all, and I certainly talk a lot about the mistakes I've made, and as I've said, the hard lessons I've learned along the way.
Sure. I think one of the aspects of the book, and why I would definitely proposition for it to be on the Commandant's reading list is that level of vulnerability that you don't normally see from someone that says, like, I did this, here's my footprints, and we won, yay, I'm awesome. And the obviously, because of your successes in that arena, in the fight against a very important fight against ISIS, speak for themselves. It's that level of vulnerability that you get beyond makes it not just a advertisement for Colonel Andy Milburn, but it's a true memoir, and so I think it's worth other future leaders reading.
Yeah, I hope so. Leadership lessons, not the sort of lessons you get from a book on leadership. I am I will say with complete honesty, I could have, perhaps should have, been relieved of my or fired basically in at every single rank, and I'm here simply because grace of God and the tolerance of my seniors, and so when someone does go through kind of a crucible of learning in that sense, rather than let it evaporate, I mean, it made sense to me to write it down. And there were other reasons we talked about why I wrote.
Sure.
I found it tremendously therapeutic. But it goes against the grain, right? For Marines to write about their careers, there's very few books out there, and I think just because of the way the publishing business is, you look at the book and you think, wow, it looks like a SEAL memoir, and the subtitle Marine Special Operations Commander at War, but it's really not. It's about a journey, but it's not. I think you agree, not about just me. It's about the people I've served with.
What advice would you just give to any of these Marines who would want to write about their experiences as well?
Definitely buy my book and read it.
Take stringent notes.
Yeah. In fact, buy 5 copies.
Hand them out.
Honestly, a couple of recommendations. First of all, if you are writing, if your goal is simply to be published, and Vic, I know you'll relate to this. There's a good chance you'll be disappointed. It is absolutely a bit of a lottery, getting things published. If you are writing for the love of writing because everyone wants to share what they've written, by all means. If you're writing for your kids, but most of all, you need to write for yourself. You need to enjoy writing. It can't be a chore for you. Now, having said that, it can be a chore when you've got to you set yourself a goal, the publishers set you a goal. So that here's just the way I handled it. I just told myself, okay, I'm going to sit down, and I gave myself a target every day: 500 words, and then 1,000 words, and then 2,000. Right, and sometimes I'd write more than 2,000, but 2,000 was my goal. But rather than just agonize over every sentence, I just poured it out. All right. And I did, writing is rewriting. That phrase is so true, because the important thing is just get it out on paper. And then second time round, as you edit it and re-edit it, it just gets a little bit easier. And then as you're editing and read things out loud to yourself, I can't tell you how important that is. And someone told me that it's, the sounding of the words, sentences, and you can quickly figure out, oh man, that sounds clumsy, right?
Yep.
Because that's the way you read. It's kind of a voice inside your head. And strangely enough, when I had to read the book for Audible, when I came to dialogue, I realized, there's a couple of things in there that I should have made more vernacular. I'll give you an example. When we're talking about, and don't worry, I'm not going to get in boring discussion.
No, go ahead.
But when you say, we never say to each other, "Will you go to the store this afternoon?" We say, "Are you gonna go to the store?" Right? But when you write it, you're trying to write good English, so you say. So I guess what I'm saying is, do not worry about grammar or anything when you first write. Write what you see in your head and from memory, and then go back and keep working on it. And read sentences that you're having a problem with out loud. When you're writing dialogue, always read it out loud. Always imagine the person saying it. And those are things that I had to learn myself. The other thing I would say is buy Stephen King on Writing is a great book because it's kind of a cool book. In the sense that he tells he tells story.
Talk about being vulnerable.
Of his early life, and some of the problems he went through, drug addiction, alcoholism, but also what it's like writing in a sense, in a state of desperation, right? I mean, he had no income at all. I mean, he took some risks along the way. But it also imparts great insights into writing, how to without it being a textbook on writing. That was a great one.
Yeah, which we read as a textbook in my program.
Did you?
So, it was one of on the required reading lists for.
Yeah, I've read it 2 or 3 times,
Yeah.
and there's another couple out there, but Steve King's was the one that really stood out. There's another one, Pressman, who wrote Gates of Fire.
Of course.
Yeah,
Steve
wrote
Pressfield,
Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Which is...
That's absolutely,
which is good. And there's a third, maybe you can help me out here. It's by Chuck something or other. He wrote the script for Fight Club. I'll remember it in a moment. I'll come back to it. What's that?
It's like a Pahanik?
It's like Pelichik. It's like, second name begins with P.
It's
Maybe
like a
listeners
Polish
will
name
figure
or
it out.
something.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's
I've heard. So some of the folks that I've talked to, they said, just open the file. Just get in the regular habit.
That's right.
Even if you don't even do anything, open the file.
Sit down at your desk.
Yeah.
And in front of the keyboard. Yeah.
Just open it and just give yourself credit for having done that, because there's so many other things you could do during your day.
The internet's dreadful.
Yeah, absolutely.
You sit down, I'll just check this, and next thing you know, 15, 20 minutes slipped away.
Right.
I know people who actually, disconnect Wi-Fi or go somewhere without Wi-Fi.
For sure.
I never got to that point, but I did. I will say it was a significant distraction. So.
And then others, so Max Brooks, I heard him say that a white page is a killer to creativity.
Yeah.
So kind of like you're saying, just start getting
it out.
Just
start
getting
it
out there, because a blank screen will kill your creativity.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I still struggle with writer's block. I mean, I've got over the Christmas break, I had an article that the editor of the paper was for this particular publication was hounding me quite rightly. I mean, I was over a week late.
Yeah.
I kept coming up with excuses.
Yeah.
I just but once I sit down and start writing, it just flows, and I get in the. I suppose it's like anything.
It's like working out, right?
Yeah, once you're in the flow. Exactly. It's like when you don't feel like working out, you tell yourself, hey, I'm just going to go to the gym. I'm going to do a few push-ups, something light. I'm going to ride the stationary bicycle softly. And then you get there, and your blood starts pumping, and then you develop energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not, as
and
the
then,
case may be.
Yeah, and then the last one was there's no such thing as wasted writing. So the fact that you wrote something.
That's right.
And you're kind of like what you're saying, writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
It's never going to be perfect your first time. So give yourself some grace and don't beat yourself up. If the first time you write it, because I know writers who have scrapped entire manuscripts because once they got through the process, this isn't what I wanted it to be. But it's not wasted time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I tell myself that too. Yeah, I wrote a book proposal during first few months of COVID, but it's a lengthy book proposal. It's 60 pages, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll never write the book because now I look back and I think, man, this plot sucks. I don't know what I was thinking. but I'll do a variation of the theme, right?
Sure. There's things you're going to get out of that. Yeah.
I'll use the characters. I'll use certain things from that. And it was a mental exercise that I think any time you practice writing, you get better.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And
speaking of practice, so you've got a bunch of stuff out right now. And congratulations on all your publications through War on the Rocks, Task and Purpose, and then you had a recent article about your experiences in Somalia. Yeah.
So the what's kind of interesting is the editor of a paper publication called News Looks, which is. Exactly as it suggested, it's kind of a Newsweek type magazine. A lot of focus on the Middle East and Africa, and he commissioned me to write a series. I think it's going to be 10, 11, 12 episodes. But he said, so every article should have some personal experience part in it that draws the reader in. Mm-hmm. But there's got to be a link to policy in there, right? And that's not actually difficult to do. The difficulty is making that blend in, 1,000 words without it being clunky.
Right.
And so I really enjoy that. I enjoy that challenge. And so you see, the first one was just a reflection of, it was kind of the intro article was about in the aftermath of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the loss of 13 Marines, and just kind of the reminder of how very separate U.S. military culture is from mainstream U.S. society. Absolutely. Now that we don't have the draft or anything, and how that means that we really that there is no driving mechanism for Congress, for instance, to provide oversight for foreign policy, in a sense, because there's not skin in the game.
Right.
It's not like Vietnam where, despite college deferments, the draft was universal, right? It was a universal experience, and we don't have that anymore. So anyway, without it sounding clunky, I wrote about that, hopefully, without sounding it clunky. And then this last one was about Somalia. Because Somalia, as we talked about, was it's not. People have seen Black Hawk Down, but there's not a lot of discussion about what got us in there and why we pulled out, and most importantly, what are the repercussions of our rapid withdrawal in the aftermath of Task Force Ranger and the death of 18 servicemen. And very clearly, that was kind of the first link in the chain for our enemies.
Yep.
America does not have a taste for casualties. They have no appetite, and if you just have to follow the progression, as I said, the subsequent U.S. feet dragging on getting involved in Rwanda and Bosnia, the bombings of the embassies in Tanzania, Nairobi, the USS Col, and eventually 9/11.
Yeah, all of these sort of probes.
Yeah, and then the pendulum goes far the other way, right? Now we're all about intervention, and we're thinking of reasons to intervene, as we did in Iraq, and we get involved in these protracted wars, and a gap appears between policy and military actions on the ground that never really gets resolved.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up while we have you here and we're talking about writing, and I got 2 Gazette editors here. If you're trying to write for a publication, so you were commissioned to do one, but if you're writing for a Gazette or something, how do you want to go about choosing your topic or reaching out to figure out what topic you should hone in on?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So the expression, write what you know. What I try and do is, I think about areas that I know, and I think about, what here would be of interest to a wider audience, not just people who know about that one topic, right? So you begin with that topic, but then you expand it. And I'll give you an example from the Gazette article, hopefully, from the Gazette article I wrote in January. So the article is about my experiences bringing together and deploying with a Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force in the counter-ISIS fight. All right, a very eclectic task force. It was an ad hoc affair, but it can't just be, oh, hey, here's what I did that summer. It's there's got to be, hey, here's why it's important. Here's the relevance to it without a tenuous link. And for me, very clearly, it was important because the lessons that I'd learned then, the Marine Corps conventional units are learning to some extent in places like MWX. And when you listen to the Commandant talking about reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, and the role of the Marine Corps going ahead, those are all things that we had to look at in Iraq in 2016. How do you influence partners? All right, when you're not actually always physically with them, when you are limited by your permissions to accompany them into combat, how do you still influence them to do the things that you need them to do, without being manipulative and still sustaining? Those are all important topics. So that's just, that's one example. Mogadishu, I didn't want to be just, hey, I remember where this happened. Well, I mean, it's a fairly interesting story. It's the first a bloody clash with Aidid's gunmen, and Aidid, of course, was subsequently the villain of Black Hawk Down. And for better or for worse, it was my platoon that first ran into his guys and were involved in a firefight. But that by itself is a vaguely interesting story. It's not really that interesting. We've had so many firefights since, but the chain, the linkage from that to subsequently what happened 9 months later, the kind of the back and forth, the tit for tat. Aidid kills 24 Pakistani peacekeepers. The UN goes after him. Unisom goes after him, makes him a targeted individual. But there is no safety valve on this revenge cycle, right? There's no dialogue. There's nothing occurring at the kind of the diplomatic level. So it's just strike, counter strike.
Volleys getting lob at one another.
Instead of hey, listen, there's no attempt to negotiate. Hey, give me the guys who killed the Pakistani peacekeepers so we can hold them accountable, and nothing like that. And so. And there's a lot of mistakes made on the ground, but the mistakes that I'm interested in were the operational to strategic mistakes that led to the debacle of Task Force Ranger, and then to withdraw U.S. troops after what seemed like a decent interval, right? So it didn't look like we're running away, so the Clinton administration waited 6 months, but everyone knew why we were pulling U.S. troops out of Somalia. And then as I talked about, the follow-on effects from that.
Yeah, and I think so I think what you're saying is that whereas in one respect you don't want it to just be a completely you don't want it to be an after-action report.
Yeah.
Or just a think piece.
Yeah.
There's got to be some engagement, but at the same time it also can't be so experiential that it's just like, hey, this is what happened when I was there, summer vacation. So you have to find that linkage.
The bridge to the reader,
right.
So the same thing when I write about, much more prosaic level. I write about my time at the recruit depot. All right, ho hum yawn. There I was, series commander or company commander, but actually it wasn't. It was a really painful tour because it involved the court. I took over a company that was in the throes of really feral culture. 12 drill instructors awaiting court-martial for just bizarre behavior, like weird homoerotic acts, stealing from recruits, all kinds of things. I think I mentioned last time, maybe I didn't, there's one case that stood out of a drill instructor whose thing was to make recruits wash each other's testicles in the shower. So these are not...
No, you did not mention that.
Okay. These are not sort of John A. Lejeune type moments, right?
That doesn't go into the Super Bowl promo.
No.
Where's Nancy when you need her to react to that?
Yeah, so, and why? Because there was a feral culture within that company. And I talk about the mistakes I made trying to fix that culture until finally I figured it out. Those lessons are relevant to anyone in any position of management leadership, civilian or military, right?
There's always a fallout.
Abuse of power,
because culture goes south very quickly, and there's always, I think was it you, Vic, who used another term for it? I say cultural power brokers. I always forget who I was talking to.
Yeah, we talked about power brokers and the gatekeepers and things.
Yeah, the gatekeepers of the culture. So, on the drill field, it's the senior drill instructors. And very obvious point. Took me a while to figure that out. And then it took me a while to figure out that unless this sounds like total violation of everything we learn about leadership. Unless I threaten their position, unless they felt the carrot and the stick of, hey, any more of my guys commit a violation of the SOP, whatever it is, I'm going to lose my black belt. And unless you can connect those dots for them, that stuff was going to continue happening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think those are, it's a fascinating exploration into power and what do people in power do with that power.
Abuse of power, and the fact that that often you get people who, through their personal charisma, will accrue influence far beyond their rank.
Yeah.
And negative influence.
And so to the idea of writing then is that you can do something about power, and you can make it all about the system or about an exploration in power. Or you can do a piece that's completely anecdotal. Neither one of those are going to really resonate with the reader unless you can find that linkage between the two.
Absolutely. You got to make it. You absolutely... I think a lot of times what you're trying to do is take the reader and allow them to be in your position and see the things that... and as you well know, that's not easy, but it's really interesting. I find it really interesting, fun almost to do.
Kind of investigation of cause and effect almost too, right?
Yeah. Well, drill field. Let's talk about it. So you had two experiences on the drill field. One as a I don't want to say young man per se, but as a young Marine, and then a second then as an officer in charge. Let's go even further back and talk about how it is that you ended up on the Yellow Footprints, because I think this is a wildly fascinating topic.
Yeah.
And I want to just like really dissect almost every aspect of it.
Yeah, so I grew up wanting to join the military, and because I grew up in the UK, well, actually Hong Kong and then the UK, but it was all British then. It was before Hong Kong was turned back to China. I was focused on going to the British Army, and bottom line is, British Army would not take me. I broke my leg playing rugby at college. I was, not a good rugby player, obviously.
Can we back up just a little bit? So about rugby, because this is something that obviously, in some facets, may resonate with our listeners, because obviously football culture. Let's talk about power. Like football culture is the sort of especially in this time of year, is the predominant entertainment culture for American society. Rugby is known as the the gentleman the hooligan sport that's played by gentlemen.
Yeah.
And then football is the gentleman sport played by hooligans. Is that right?
Football as in soccer.
Yeah, soccer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, rugby, for the most part, if you go through the private school system, which is confusingly referred to as the public school system in the UK, you will play rugby, and it's. I mean, I enjoyed playing it. Wasn't terribly good, and I was definitely playing way above my level.
Yeah.
Broke my leg badly. In fact, that's why my leg still only bends 90 degrees. I'm still not physically qualified for the Marine Corps. If you look up, the physical requirements for leg bending, that's why they make you do the duck walk. So anyway, I was confronted. I'd chosen to do philosophy at college. I mean, because I was interested in political philosophy, I was interested in ethics, and it was a surprisingly difficult subject, actually. But then I was confronted with the prospect of graduating with a philosophy degree, which doesn't necessarily have a lot of, practical application.
Yeah, I have one as well, so I know your pain, my friend.
Yeah, so we must be among two of very few Marine officers with that
that's why
background.
we're both in this studio and not out.
That's right.
in uniform. Yeah. So what was your discipline?
What do you mean, within philosophy?
Yeah.
No, we had to do, I think it's like six areas of philosophy.
Okay.
So, ethics, logic, I forget all, religious philosophy, political philosophy.
Ours was a little different. Ours was the ancients, the moderns, the postmoderns, and then the Eastern.
Yeah.
And so my focus was Eastern.
Yeah.
But, we still had to do the classics, and we still had to do the moderns, Locke and John Locke and David Hume. And, I had to do, obviously, Socrates and Aristotle, Plato, and all that stuff too. But
yeah, we focused towards the end. I think the last year, we chose like 2 or 3 electives, and I want to say mine were they were actually religious philosophy, surprisingly, ethics, and logic. I want to say logic. You never guess it.
Is it rhetoric or is it logic?
It was logic. Yeah, so it's kind of math involved.
Yeah. Who was your religious philosophy?
Oh goodness! Don't start. Don't start. We're talking like over 30 years ago now. When people question me about philosophy, I mean, I can keep up on stuff like Locke and Rousseau and stuff that I really enjoyed reading. And,
Descartes and this.
Descartes, and I even reread the Communist Manifesto from time to time.
Ooh, careful now.
Sad individual.
Well, no, you gotta study, like your ideological enemies, where they're coming from. There's nothing wrong with refreshing.
No, the problem is it's a really compelling read, right?
Like, I just say you don't say it out loud. That's all.
Karl Marx knew what he was talking about.
It's a compelling read. The problem is that we look at it through the lens of what communism has become in practice.
Well, I mean, and my comment is definitely is an example of what we talked about last time you were on board. Is that sort of lack of intellectual curiosity? It's like, don't talk to me about that because I know that I disagree with it, so I don't even want to know what he's talking about.
I mean, you hear people here routinely throw around terms like socialism. Without really understanding what it means. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I mean, how many times, name the politician, get excused being a socialist, but that you look at that particular politician's mandate, and there's nothing in there about nationalized industry, which is, for instance, a central theme of socialism.
Yep.
To many people, socialism is nationalized health care or unemployment benefits. I mean, come on, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. But those are short reads too. Like you can knock out the Communist
for sure.
Manifesto in an afternoon.
Yeah.
If you really try it.
I think. Well, that's a rabbit hole maybe for a third time to come down.
Federalist Papers was one that I
right.
surprisingly enjoyed.
So you're studying philosophy.
Yeah,
you're breaking legs, or you're getting legs broken.
Yeah. So I finished my degree at London University. By the way, I went to University College London, and I only mention that because there was a very eclectic mix of students who came out of UCL, and in fact, Jihadi John briefly attended UCL.
And so for
I never ran into him at an alumni party. But
So, for those who maybe have been sort of landlocked, their experiences have been sort of landlocked. What was it like then to be in London in the 80s studying philosophy, but yet having an inclination towards the military?
Yeah. So in the 80s in London was a very, I suppose, from the 60s through the 80s, very radical time in the sense that, the average British, very European university was, by sort of the standards of the United States, the student body was pretty intensely left-wing, and there was a large activist community within each student body. And, it's funny, I meet my peers now years on, and of course they've changed. They vote for the Conservative Party, but like Churchill made a comment that, and I'm paraphrasing him, and I know people misquote Churchill all the time. This is not a misquote. He said something, if you aren't a socialist before you're 21, you have no heart, and if you don't veer over to the right by the time you're 40, you have no head. It's which is kind of a good way of putting it. So it was, what's interesting about that is it really, there was kind of this, remember this was I'm trying to think, this is during the Thatcher government. It was during the miners' riots, miners' strikes in the UK. So there's a great deal of turbulence, and I mention that because some people point with alarm to what's happening in the U.S. now, or has happened recently, but that was kind of the norm back in 60s through the 80s in most European countries. Great deal of turbulence, bitterness, anger, rioting, all over the UK back then, and the miners' strike was like war every day on the picket lines.
Was that the Geordies? Was that?
Durham. Yeah, Durham was involved in that. Yorkshire, a lot of the, but it was the age-old, it was the painful transition from a manufacturing economy based on manufacturing to one based on other things, services, finances, and the coal mines were no longer productive. Thatcher government chose to closed them down, which of course threatened the jobs of, thousands of miners, and became a very bitter. It was essentially a battleground. If you look at newsreels back then at the time.
Sure. And so you mentioned, so you were born in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So Hong Kong was, of course, a British colony back then. My father was in the Hong Kong government. That's amazing.
And what was he doing before?
He was kind of interesting. I'll keep it very, very quick. But my father, his father was killed in the First World War. Like, like a quarter of the male population.
Right.
On the Battle of the Somme, which is now iconic as just a field of loss. For those of you who, your readers are probably familiar with some of the facts. 1st of July 1916 was the first day of the Battle of the Somme, and the British had 50,000 casualties just on on the first day alone. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah,
it's
that's
hard
to
to imagine.
fathom that,
So the scale of loss was vast. My grandfather was in the Grenadier Guards, which then was kind of one of the elite units, and he survived until September before he was killed. But anyway, my point is, my father grew up, had to go to just like the only man in the house, went to joined the Merchant Marine at the age of 16, and then went through the Second World War on the transatlantic convoys. And again, for those of you, your listeners at all interested in military history, it's pretty amazing story. Sort of between 1939 and 1941, Britain was kept alive by the United States, the flow of goods back and forth. And of course, the Germans established a U-boat blockade, understanding that they could starve, with the intent of starving the country out. And Churchill, again, I'm quoting Churchill, but he said, that was the only time he became seriously worried, because they seriously faced the prospect of so because they'd lost all the ability for imports from Europe, because of course the Germans held all of Europe. So it was kind of tenuous lifeline, and everything being brought across in these slow-moving convoys protected by Navy ships. The U.S. would escort them for the first part, and then there was a part, and then they'd turn over to the Brits and kind of once they got outside U.S. territorial waters.
And he was a crew of a pretty iconic ship.
Yeah,
as
the
well,
Queen
right?
Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of interesting. So he became an officer within the Merchant Marine, and his forte was navigation. Remember, as a kid who had not gone to college or anything. He hadn't, he left school at 16, but learned, was taught navigation, and he became the first officer on the Queen Mary, which is the like the XO.
Yeah.
And in that position, he was a navigation officer, so he'd have to plot a course across the Atlantic, which wasn't as simple as, hey, where's which way is England? It was
Right.
It was they would use intelligence reports based on U-boat transmissions, trying to work out. I mean, there's a guessing game. Where are the most likely points of ambush? How do we fool them this time? What are our last few courses? It was quite and so plotting that course, you're either condemning the ship to maybe certain disaster or finding a gap in the U-boats. And kind of interesting, the U-boat commanders, there was a bounty out on the Queen Mary. If they sank the Queen Mary, they could destroy almost an entire U.S. division. Because it wasn't foodstuffs, it was U.S. troops.
Yeah.
After 1941, before 1941, it was all foodstuffs coming across. But,
God.
Would his picture be up in the Queen Mary right now?
I doubt it. I think they have pictures of skippers there.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the it's like a haul of all the pictures of all the crew from World War II, and I didn't know.
Yeah, so for our listeners, for our listeners who aren't aware, what Nick's referring to is that the Queen Mary is now a luxury hotel in the Port of Long Beach.
Yep.
Yeah.
Luxury hotel / probably the best haunted house you can go on.
Right.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
So it's an amazing visit. Like if you can get to it, you got to get to it.
Yeah,
but
it's really cool. Yeah, my college we have an annual formal event, and they had it one year at the Queen Mary. So
it's quite a story. Hopefully they dwell a little bit on the Second World War history, because that was truly that was quite something. So the Merchant Marine suffered a cataclysmic amount of casualties, as you can imagine. I forget, in terms of tonnage, it doesn't really matter because people can't equate that to ships, but they were sinking hundreds of ships a month, my father, for my first introduction, I suppose, to what we call PTSD now, my father used to have awful nightmares that used to wake me up as a kid. But Second World War generation, it was, I remember my mom goes, "Oh, that's normal. A lot of people in the war have these things." Yeah. Anyway, it's quite an interesting aspect of Second World War history. And my, not to bore your listeners, but now at the same time, there were convoys going to the UK, and the Brits were running convoys to the Russians, like with a lot of Lend-Lease stuff. So U.S. equipment, they would then relay it in convoys up to Russia. And those convoys became notorious for casualties because if guys, they were the only guys who could pick up survivors were the Navy escorts. The merchant ships couldn't stop for survivors. And so, but if you went in the water on one of the Russian convoys, you were dead within minutes. Yeah. Okay.
And plus, like, you had the submarines going after them, but also, like, I think the Luftwaffe hit
yeah,
them too.
that's right. Yeah. It was. They were getting hit. Or every day. Anyway, last thing I say on that, there's a great book called PQ-17 Convoy to Hell, where the Germans sank literally every single ship in like a 40-ship convoy. You know what I mean? But they, or maybe one ship made it through. I mean, it's grim reading, but just what those guys went through, what was kind of the norm, is extraordinary. And then the Germans, of course, the tide turned. It's an interesting story. Tide turned with the introduction of Aztec, the depth charges, sonar, all these technological used in the right combination, turned the tables completely, 1943. And it was the German U-boats that were getting hunted. And if you read, their casualty rate was extraordinary. Of course, you sink a U-boat, everyone on board dies.
That's it, it's over. That is just so fascinating. So then, all right. So then, I guess fast forward. Then you're leaving university with a broken stick, and was this the moment that you decided about the Marine Corps?
Yeah.
Or you went to law school?
I went to law school. So you had the option to go if you got a degree above a certain level, you could go to law school and do essentially a condensed law degree that qualified you then to go to the bar. And so I did. I failed an exam, no surprise. And if you failed an exam, you had to take a block of 4 exams again, even the ones you passed. It was real pain. So I had to take a forced sabbatical of a year. During that year, I traveled to Australia. And why Australia? Because my girlfriend happened to be there at the time. And I wanted to do this trip as much overland as possible. I didn't want to just get on a plane. So this was problematic. This was problematic, and I'm dating myself now, but this was like, fall of 1987, early 1987. And so, there was a war in Afghanistan. Imagine that. And then Iran was very hostile. I mean, remember the revolution that occurred in Iran.
79, right? It was
79, yep.
So,
and
very fresh.
and so I had to choose. I had to choose between the two, and Iran was the less of two evils, I thought. And so I got a transit visa for Iran. I had 2 weeks to cross Iran, which I did, barely by the skin of my teeth. Interestingly enough, I was one of the few Americans, I think, to actually experience an Iraqi air raid. Iraqi. It wasn't bombers. I was in Isfahan, a town called Isfahan. The Iraqis did use bombers, but they didn't, not as deep as Isfahan. It was the beginning of the War of the Cities. There's like five separate kind of strikes that the Iraqis did on Iran, and I happened to be in Iran during one of them. And so I was in Isfahan when it was hit by Scuds, and I slept through the entire thing. Much to the chagrin of the hotel staff, who apparently were pounding on my door and then disappeared in the shelter. And I woke up the next morning, and the area around the hotel was leveled by Scuds. But sadly, I've got no personal. I was so tired. I've got.
Well, you had plenty of Scud experience later on, so.
Yeah, but yeah. So being on the receiving end of a.
And you were on the receiving end of a few things on this trip.
Yeah. I was actually arrested in a town called Shiraz. I spent an uncomfortable night in jail there. I was not mistreated. They were actually very courteous to me. And oddly enough, the lieutenant, the Iranian lieutenant who arrested me, or his guys arrested me, was a London University graduate. So, so we were alumni, different sides of the bars, and we could talk about the old times and our love of London, but I was still under arrest. And his plan was to send me to Tehran the next morning for questioning. But the next morning, the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, it's before we started referring to them as IGRC, we just called them Revolutionary Guard. I say we, that's how they were known in the West End. They had already taken me off the bus in Tehran and questioned me all night with a Filipino lady interpreting. And so they were, oddly enough, satisfied that I was really an idiot, but not a danger to them. And so they told this guy, hey, let him go. And
That's
so,
insane.
Yeah.
So
It was such an eye opener for me. There was this the night when when you're a kid, you think, and I wasn't a kid, I was in my early 20s, though that seems like a kid now, but you always have this feeling that you're immortal, which is why the military recruits so heavily for 18, 20-year-olds,
Right.
But I remember being taken off the bus and feeling nervous, and then taken to a hangar by the bus station and questioned. And I say all night, that's an exaggeration, but it was like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember at one point there was this Filipino girl translating, and of course she was wearing kind of a burqa.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point I made a joke, and she glared at me and she said, "You don't understand. This is not funny. You could disappear and no one cares."
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
okay.
like, dude,
I
you
care.
still
Yeah.
haven't
Does that
figured out
count? Yeah.
what's at stake here.
But she was absolutely right,
Yeah.
and it was a sobering moment that I really was in. There was no recourse. There was no U.S. embassy. There was a Swiss embassy, but they were unlikely to intervene or be able to intervene
That's
if
weird.
anything went wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a glimpse of, Iranians were super nice people. Ordinary Iranians, super nice people. They bore no hostility to the United States. And more than once, Iranians said to me, "When is Reagan going to come and rescue us?" It was
Yeah,
interesting.
Really?
I got glimpses of what the regime was like. In Shiraz, it was a staging point for the Iran-Iraq war, because remember, that was in full swing then. So there's a lot of wounded. The hospitals were overflowing there because, of course, this was the era of the human waves. If you read, I just finished a biography of Soleimani, the Iranians were taking staggering casualties. They were putting guys in line without weapons at that point. They were, so desperate. And as I left Shiraz, it's like a medieval scene. This is no exaggeration. They had like gallows on the hill overlooking town, and there were like bodies swinging from the gallows. And the guy next to me on the bus said, "Yeah, they deserters, army deserters. They get hung."
Jeez.
So
why did you get arrested? Just for being a white guy?
because
and...
I was obviously not a local.
Right, yeah.
I went running. Which is also dumb. You can see I really wasn't thinking. And then I realized I had people running with me who were actually running after me.
You weren't in a
it wasn't a competitive
ad hoc 5K. No.
They were wearing boots and carrying weapons. So, but yeah, as they say, they were scrupulously good to me.
Yeah.
I had I was advised to. Yeah, there's another interesting episode. So we stopped. What I realize now was near the scene of Desert One, and I forget the name of the town, but they had dragged a helicopter from Desert One and built a little kind of triumphant memorial, not memorial to the Americans, but obviously a triumphant a statue to what they call their victory. It took me a while. The bus driver stopped, all the passengers got off, kind of to see this. Although this had happened, 6-7 years before, but evidently it was still big enough news. It was kind of I suppose a totemic place for people to be able to appreciate the might of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
It's so crazy. And so, history buff, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of the simplistic dividing lines were during that period there was that the U.S. backed Iraq and the Soviets backed Iran. Is that sort of where the
that
lines
is
were
a
drawn
little
in?
oversimplistic. Actually,
Yeah.
Iran was really isolated.
Okay.
The Iranians didn't get a lot of support from the Russians. When you read the history of it, it's really hard not to feel desperately. Feel sympathy certainly for the Iranian people, the people who are sustaining this war. Tremendous courage. For the average Iranian, he believed that. This was his country under threat. So and the scale of casualties were catastrophic. I mean, I think you look it up. I don't want to misquote, but certainly near 1 million on the Iranian side for a relatively small country, right?
Yeah.
Close to 1 million casualties, for a country. I forget what the population was then, but extraordinarily high.
So you went basically from the frying pan into the fryer, because your next destination was Pakistan.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, I got to.
So your dad got all the navigation skills.
I got to the border it's a town called Zahedan, which is right on the border between Iran and Pakistan, and they only opened the border during the day during certain hours, so I had to wait there until the border opened the next night, and I had by then it turned out to be dysentery. I mean, I was really sick, so those of you who had dysentery, it's a very unpleasant experience. So I spent and their latrines were not they were not like
water closet.
They weren't state of the art. There was like at the bus station.
No great
there was
plugins in there.
Yeah, I would choose a cat hole in 29 Palms anytime. But anyway, so I'm downloading in this bus station toilet, squatting over a hole, and I start to hear rocks bounce off the roof. It's corrugated iron roof, and this crowd is gathered, figured out I'm a foreigner, and they're throwing rocks at the, and it could have just been kids or youths, but it's fairly threatening, some yelling. So I finished anyway. I came out, and the crowd started like following me down the street. Something. By then I'm getting worried.
Yeah, it's not another 5K.
And then and I was just I was thinking it's just about to break into a run, though. I figured that might be a mistake. Came around the corner, and there's a border guard police station, Iranian, of course. And I just went in and said, "Hey man, I've got these dudes following me. Can you put me up for the night?" And they were actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they did. So I stayed in a cell, the door open.
Yeah.
So my second night in a cell, but this time, and the next morning they took me to the border. They escorted me to make sure nothing went wrong. I got into Pakistan, and this was during a particularly turbulent time. And so what had happened in Pakistan, unbeknownst to me, is there was rioting taking place in Quetta, and of course Quetta, home of the Taliban, again unknown to me at the time, but it was over bus seats between the Baluchis and the Pathans. Pashtus is both very belligerent people, and so they were happy to kill each other over bus seats. And then the Pakistani came in. The Pakistani army is not renowned for its restraint in these situations, right. So they were also shooting people on the street, and they had imposed a 24-hour curfew. And so I found myself arriving in Quetta to this scene that did look like the aftermath of a battle. I mean, there were bodies in the street and Pakistani patrols carrying Lee Enfield rifles, by the way, antiquated things, really? But still deadly. And I stayed in this hotel that was definitely not 4 stars until, for 36 hours until the next train to Islamabad. And then even on the train, and I linked up with an Australian guy on the train, so but the Pakistani army would board the train at various places, I remember that night, and just grab people, haul them off, if they figured they'd been involved, I guess, in whatever, riots. And it was a real eye-opener. It was, now I look back, probably one of the times I've been in most danger in my life, despite subsequent combat tours, and indeed when I got down to Islamabad and went into the U.S. Embassy, and this is really why I joined the U.S. Marine Corps. Okay, I'll get to that in a moment. But I found out at the embassy, American Embassy, when they heard I'd come out of Iran, they told me the story about an Australian-Italian kid about my age who went going the other way from Iran up through to Turkey. I mean, from Pakistan up to Turkey through Iran, was arrested and treated pretty roughly. They put him through like a mock execution, and when he was released, he was he's obviously pretty messed up. So I was fortunate. Anyway, I go into the embassy and I meet. I pick up my passport, which is the reason why I'm going there. my parents had sent it ahead. I was traveling on a British passport, considered wise not to travel on an American passport through Iran. So at least I had that much sense.
Yeah.
And I'm eating in the cafeteria there in the USMC, and I see these guys, and they just kind of reek discipline and health, and they've got short cropped hair and muscular. And I was thinking, don't get the wrong picture, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm like, but they asked me over, sat down, a meeting. They were like, "Hey, you the guy who just went through Iran?" I went, "Yeah," because the word got round to the embassy. Hey, this wacko just came out of Iran, So they thought that was pretty cool, and I got invited to a party that night at the Marine House. Of course, these are MSG, Marine Security Guards, right?
Yep.
And they don't live. Their life is not the norm for the average
Right. The Marine House
right?
is always usually pretty nice.
So I go to the Marine House, and it's this palatial place. They've got a swimming pool. Beautiful women are attending this party. There's a open bar, and I'm thinking, this is a pretty cool life. I'm gonna sign up for this one, Anyway, fast forward. About 7 months later, I end up in Australia. About 7 months later, I go back to the UK. And again, I go to the USMC in London, and I forget why. And I run into the one Marine recruiter in London, 1987. And cut a long story short, I was his project for 1987. I probably filled the one quota.
What was the quota like for?
Oh yeah, but I drove a really hard bargain with him. Remember, I just finished law school. I was guaranteed PFC out of boot camp and guaranteed infantry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrung him
well,
dry.
yeah, you really got him by
he's probably he's probably still sweating that story. It's like, damn, that kid was tough.
How did he do it?
Yeah. Anyway, fast forward, ended up in Paris Island, where I was the source of much amusement to the drill instructors.
Yeah, so what is
that? Earned the moniker Boy George.
Oh, very nice.
And almost sent home several times because I failed every physical from MEPS onwards. But my recruiter was a smart guy. Not only had he recruited someone out of law school and persuaded him to join the infantry with one stripe on their shoulder, but he figured out that if he got me, this is a true story. These are all true stories, by the way. If he got me a one-way ticket, it would be very difficult to send me back. And they could not work out. They could work out funding lines at MEPS to send me anywhere in the United States, but not across the Atlantic. Yeah. And so that's bottom line is that's how I ended up 31 years later retiring as a colonel.
Yeah, and so even as an American, someone carrying an American passport, when your feet hit the yellow footprints, that was the first time you had been on U.S. soil, correct?
Well, MEPS was New York.
MEPS New York, okay.
Yeah, and then Paris Island.
Yeah.
I mean, so Paris Island was my Ellis Island.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, this place sucks, man. Why does everyone want to come to this country? Everyone yells at you. And, of course, the accents down there then, because all the drill instructors seemed to have southern accents, and it was, to me, impenetrable way of speaking. Absolutely impossible.
I mean, it still is.
It's to be challenging for sure. And then your so as you're going through, then when was the first experience where you had being an American, not under the confines of the rigid boot camp structure?
Yeah, so Camp Lejeune, right? So I went through the School of Infantry in Camp Lejeune, and that was that was like a holiday camp after, Camp Guy, even Camp Guy.
Did you get leave now, or you get liberty?
You get off, and one thing I really treasure even to this day are the friendships I made. I'm not in contact with any of those guys again, but I made really good friendships at boot camp and then at SOI.
Yeah.
And it's something that will be familiar to all of your readers in the military. Even then, peacetime, just going through those experiences, you build pretty strong bonds and really, great guys. And it makes...
and you're about, 10 years older than a lot of these cats?
Well, no, not quite. I was 24.
Oh, okay, 24.
Yeah,
okay.
so not that much older, but I was certainly older than my drill instructors. I wasn't even the oldest guy in the platoon. We had a guy who was 27. We did until they found out he'd done time in prison for armed robbery, and he disappeared like in month 2. But But yeah, great friends, and so weekends in Wilmington, a lot of drinking and hanging out in hotels on the beach and usual escapades that young
hijinks
Marines
that ensue.
Yeah, but harmless stuff, I mean, we just a great time. Yeah. So that I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to bore all your listeners.
No. This is so good. This is so good because
that was a journey.
There's so many interesting little things there. I mean, is to say that there's a standard or a conventional way that a Marine becomes a Marine is probably an oversimplification.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I would say though that like being able to sort of dissect and really like examine your journey is really special, and I think it's it's fun now. I'm sure, obviously, at the time, doing all these ad hoc 5Ks probably wasn't awesome for you, but I mean, what a interesting and really fascinating journey. So thank you for sharing that. And I know again, like you're super generous with your time, so I really appreciate it. But I did want to talk a little bit now, so let's fast forward 31 years.
Yeah.
And we had talked about some of your publications and things. You have another project that you're working on, is that correct? And as we look at Force Design 2030, some of the challenges that the Commandant is coming up against, tries to position us for the future.
So, I have to preface this by saying, as I'm not I don't automatically write in defense of the institutional commands and everything, but I do feel compelled to comment and write about things that are happening in the Marine Corps now. There's been, the problem is this, that even people who think that they are innovative thinkers and revolutionary, I think, become very easily tied to the status quo. And so, there's a great deal of emotional discussion now about getting rid of tanks, getting rid of the AAV, which I think you agree was obsolete the day it was made.
Whatever.
But and people, I know you do a series called Amphibiosity, and I think my point was earlier, which I stand by, is there's nothing particularly inherently. We shouldn't feel automatically, reflexively tied to our amphibiosity. I mean, we are an adaptable organization, and any healthy organization needs to adapt to survive.
Not our equipment set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or our immediate mission set. Look at the Marine Corps history, just 20th century. Gone from the land battles, iconic land battles of the First World War, to the Banana Wars, and then thanks to an errant, eccentric alcoholic, Pete Ellis, who would have been discharged as a lieutenant in today. We get pulled into, and I say we, but Ellis died in 23, but he wrote a book in 1921 that predicted Japanese offensive. Almost exactly the way it was going to happen. 20 years later, right? And then the Pacific island hopping campaign that the Marines would have to do. And his book, because Ellis, because of his background, he was a First World War veteran, and he'd become close to Lejeune. At one point, he'd been on Lejeune's staff after Ellis was wounded First World War. And so Lejeune kind of looked out for him. And so his ideas gained traction. The people didn't think of him as just some lunatic. They knew he was a bright guy. He had issues, definitely. I mean, he was hospitalized regularly for his alcoholism. Lejeune even interceded several times to prevent him from being discharged from the Marine Corps. So I suppose Lejeune was, in a sense, an enabler, but thank God he was.
Right.
And Ellis foresaw this, and the Marine Corps, instead of saying, hey, the Banana Wars are our thing, with some prodding from the Commandant then, started to get busy on preparing for amphibious war. I mean, I'm shoehorning this because, it was over the period of years. In the 30s is where it really picked up steam, with the development of the Higgins boat and tactics.
But there are definitely
nevertheless,
Ellis
was the guy, arguably. He was certainly instrumental. And sadly, he died on Pelor in the South Pacific in 1920. I want to say 1923, at the age of 43. And there's a lot of talk about the time that he was a victim. The Japanese had killed him. Blah blah blah. Most historians think that's absolute BS now. That he probably died of alcoholism. I mean, he died because he really was an intense drinker, intense thinker, and intense drinker. Can you imagine doing all that, writing all that, the writing way he did, and but still suffering from...
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about
You don't have to
Stephen
point
King.
to me. I'm not in an analogy.
This is just a thing. We had a reaction.
But anyway, so my point is, look, what's happened to the Pete Ellises of the world? So now we realize, we collectively, that everything, so the primacy of the kill chain, down from tactical level. I talked about this last time. Squad level, the methodology of warfare that we are currently using, close with and destroy the enemy using squad automatic weapons with some indirect fire, is antiquated and outdated. And what the Turks are doing, what the Iranians have been doing with drones, and Turks in particular, using expendable blue-collar drones in conjunction with loitering munitions, and track what they've been doing in Syria, Libya, and guess what? Most recently in Ethiopia, where they've turned around the Tigrayan army. All drones doing this at range. And we're still pursuing, in acquisition process, carriers and ACVs and these Gucci expensive but already obsolete pieces of equipment, outranged, outdated, vulnerable. And so, what the commandant's trying to do, and I don't speak for him, and I'm not paid to speak for him, but is kind of drag the Marine Corps into this part of the 21st century. And we haven't got our hands around it again. I'm not agreeing with everything the Commandant says. I think there's a danger in us being wedded too closely to the Navy. I don't think the Navy's particularly interested in what we think our role is. I'm generalizing here.
Right.
I think there's danger in getting too focused on us firing the naval strike missile. I think even perhaps the Commandant's thinking that too now, as he talks about our role being as sensors, reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance. But we collectively haven't figured out what that's going to mean for training and doctrine. We're experimenting in one place on 29 Palms through the MWX, but that's kind of it's almost like a silo out there. I think mainstream Marine Corps needs to be dragged in, and I don't know if people are deliberately dragging their feet or not. But why? But we still have people. We still have people bleeding for the tanks. I mean, you just want to say shut up, and AEVs. We still have people pursuing acquisition of the ACV, which, as I've said, is it's hard to envision a useful role for this vehicle unless we're rolling right back into counterinsurgency. It's heavy, it guzzles gas, it's vulnerable, and it does nothing to extend our kill chain. Instead of investing heavily in long-range precision munitions like loitering, like expendable loitering munitions, instead of training our guys to use drones and developing an expendable drone that we can use in swarms, just the way our adversaries are. It's time to start learning from our adversaries. I will shut up. I know I've
No, all good.
No.
And so this push and pull that you're looking at, then it's adaptation, or is it interpretation? Where is it that you feel the Commandant's sitting, and then where's the push?
Yeah,
pull?
I think honestly, from those who oppose what is happening, it's a failure of imagination.
Okay.
And I would like to say it's a failure to look at our own history, but some of the senior retired officers who are pushing back are very well aware of the Marine Corps history. So I think the danger is this, that as we view the world obviously through the prism of our lifespan. Okay, don't worry, I'm not going to wax lyrical on philosophy here, but that's what we do. Mm-hmm. So if you get a guy who spent 40 years in the Marine Corps and this is what he knows, these things, they become iconic to him, and they assume an importance that they probably don't deserve when you look at the lifespan of the Marine Corps, past and hopefully future. And so people become wedded to these iconic symbols, whether it's the tank, whether it's the AAV, whether it's even our vision as an amphibious entry force, instead of trying to figure out, okay, where are things going now? What is happening in the world now? How do we adjust?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that like the loitering munitions, like the expendable, like tiny drones, like you can hold them in your hand, right? The kind of like represent kind of like a watershed, like a dreadnought moment, like
I think that's a great example. Or similar to 100 years ago, beginning of the First World War, where development of the machine gun, wired communications, made the strongest form of warfare very firmly, handed the baton to the defense, right? Mm-hmm. And it took hundreds of thousands of casualties in several years to figure out a way around that. And the Germans started experimenting with stormtroop tactics, and and then eventually, there's a development of the I'm trying to remember the vacuum, the thing that the development that enabled portable radios and all those things.
Oh, the vacuum tubes.
Yeah,
the vacuum tubes,
that then
the transistor
and faster tanks and everything that helped develop blitzkrieg tactics. And ability to talk to aircraft, blah blah. So it's technology combined with imagination, right?
Yeah.
I would say that part is lacking now. Of course, we have the technology. To quote the intro of the $6 Million Man for some of your older viewers.
I know.
Of course.
What's that modern?
It's not even a technologically high bar.
Yeah.
But the problem is because we're Americans, we're wedded to high price, low, relatively low density items.
Well, a certain way of doing business too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll give you, so our adversaries can run circles around us using lower tech that, for instance, the attack on the Aramco oil processing facilities in the 2 locations in Saudi Arabia 2019. Swarms of drones penetrated the Saudi air defenses. And the Saudis have Patriot missiles, but they were useless against these things. And it was very similar, historical analogy, not the dreadnoughts in this case, but 1941, May of 1941, the British launched an attack on the Bismarck, which was the German state-of-the-art pocket battleship, right?
And they used the swordfish biplanes.
Very swordfish biplanes, and they didn't cripple Bismarck, but they significantly damaged her, slowed her down, made her vulnerable for subsequent destruction, without a loss of a single biplane, and the Germans themselves, it's quite interesting, there's a YouTube video on this, looked at why that happened. And the Germans had a state-of-the-art fire direction system that was incapable of tracking a plane as slow as the ferry swordfish.
And it was
flying
low too, right?
Flying as low as the ferry swordfish. They had point-detonating shells that passed right through the fabric because they were designed to impact on detonation with metal. So, it's kind of it's not a 100% analogy, but that's similar to,
exactly.
British didn't know that at the time, but it was, it was a fluke.
Yeah.
Well, this has all been so great. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Did you have anything else?
Well, you mentioned using your analogy of you handing the baton off with different technologies. Where's the baton right now?
Well, you mean as far as within the Marine Corps?
Or we can do internationally as well.
Like with
I'm trying to think back what I said.
So you said like the machine gun and
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Unmanned systems, right? Mass produced, fairly sophisticated, but expendable systems. When I say fairly sophisticated, I mean having the means to you can to have electro-optical sensors, or even signals intelligence. So pretty advanced target designation, but at the same time not so expensive. contrast with our own, MQ1s or MQ9s, where if there's an a significant ADA threat, as there was in Yemen, we ground them. Well, that's the whole point of unmanned systems, is supposed to be that they're expendable, right?
Well, and then also too, like the point of use, like you don't have to have a ton of training to be able to employ these things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we don't train our guys very well in the use of UAV. We spend a lot of time still, quite rightly, with marksmanship. Of course, that's important. Or how to clear a blockage on the saw. But I was trying to think of that analogy.
Well, when we first got our own little squad drones that were just used for surveillance.
Yeah.
We had to send folks to Al Assad, and they would just get a quick class.
Yeah, whatever it was, the Dragon.
The one that you put together out of your backpack, you throw
like
it, and
an
it crashes.
model.
Yeah, and then you. So we had to send some operators to get those. But yeah, that was one of those sort of quick use things.
This is not a special operations skill, but we don't, again at MWX, we say, where are your Pumas? They all broke, or we didn't bring them, or, because it doesn't seem sexy, and we're not in that mindset yet. As far as use of loitering munitions or long-range precision fires, MARSOC has the heroes, but there's no reason why we can't afford to push, even start with something like the Switchblade, which the media is fond of calling a kamikaze drone, but it's loitering munition, but it's shorter range, 10 kilometers. At least that's better than anything available at squad level right now, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Frankly, at battalion level, unless you've got call for fire for artillery, and that's another story, is that we're not even good at closing the kill chain with the things that we have right now below platoon level. Seriously. We very rarely at MWX see that happen. We just haven't. We talk the big game, but we don't conduct training in a way that it becomes habit of action for a squad leader to pick up a radio and call for fire and get the people he needs on the net. It's to conduct a fire net often doesn't go, down to below platoon level.
And who are we talking to? Is there any guys were talking to Colonel Howe, that he was talking about having someone to expand the squad capability, like on hand?
So what you end up, you send out these people, these specialists, and then where do you put them? And if a commander doesn't have the intellectual curiosity to figure out what that person
100%,
does,
like
they just sit in the COC.
Signals intelligence, EW is a big thing. Time and time again. You'll have what are they called? What are we calling them now? Radio. The radio battalion guys are going to be pissed at me, but there's teams down. That are intended to be attached at platoon level that can conduct a range of activities within the electromagnetic spectrum, from collection through jamming, right? Hugely important. We should integrate them in the same way that we integrate forward observers and everything else in our disposal. Tactical cyber, all right? Why is cyber missions held at so high a level? We can destroy things. We can drop bombs on things. We can mortars. We can kill people. But we can't use offensive cyber operations to suppress or disable or neutralize enemy C2 systems, right? Why not? It's use of the information spectrum, targeting the enemy. Literally targeting the enemy. There's text messages. Hey, if you do this, this is going to happen to you. We can shoot people all day, but we can't send them.
And we talked to you last time you were here about some of the successes you had integrating that at just the team level and working in Mosul.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that this is a mindset. These are techniques that should not be confined to special operations forces. There's no reason. There's no reason to. Look how well Marines are trained in some areas. How proficient they are in some areas. Look at the money we have to spend on, various things. The state of, which is good, but over in MCO, they've got the most extraordinary state-of-the-art audio-visual equipment now for Zoom, so that anyone speaks, a camera goes, focuses on them, and it automatically, it's an automatic directional camera and microphone. I haven't seen anything like it at Joint Special Operations University. But that's tremendous, of course. But my point is, the Marine Corps should be on the cutting edge when it comes to weapon systems and employment.
And if anyone of our listeners has any ideas of how to get on that cutting edge, please write to the Marine Corps Gazette.
Love the plug. Love the plug. Well, Andy, thank you so much again for being here. This has been awesome. And what can we expect from you next? What should we be looking out for?
So we're interviewing the Commandant and Christian Bros for the Irregular Warfare podcast. Christian Bros wrote the book The Kill Chain, which I recommend to your listeners. So by the time this gets aired, that podcast will be out. Look up the Irregular Warfare podcast. Just Google it, and I think you'll find everyone will find episodes there that they enjoy. It's like a 40-minute segment. You can listen to it while you're running or driving to work or on the toilet, depending on your daily routine.
Yeah, please. Hopefully you're not on there for 40 minutes, but you can catch it in multiple iterations.
Look down below. You'll find a link to it.
Yeah. We'll put a link at the show.
Yeah, excellent. I'm continuing to write this series on kind of episodes from my life, but connected to policy level kind of decisions. That's in Newslook magazines.
Newslook magazine. Yep. Okay.
And please buy my book.
Buy the book.
Buy the book.
There's an
Buy the
Audible
Tempest
version.
Gathers.
I read the Audible version myself, which is not a good advertisement necessarily, but it was tremendously difficult, and it's cheaper to buy it in Audible version than in hardback, and it's probably Kindle.
And same thing.
Yeah.
While you're driving, doing chores around the house.
100%.
Well, buy the hardcover if you
Taking a
can, because it
squat.
looks good on a bookshelf.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, well, sir, thank you again so much for being here, and we'll look to get you back.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks
Okay.
so
All
much,
right.
guys.
All right.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.